Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Soldiers of Cinema podcast. I am Cullen McFader, joined as always by Clark Coffey.
Hey.
It's a good day to talk about movies. I hope that
It's always a good day to talk about
That's
movies.
a good point. Yeah, that's like a
Come on.
non. What do you call that? A non sequitur? When it's like
When is there
pointless?
not? Well, it's
redundant?
not a non sequitur. You're on topic, but it's kind of
redundant.
redundant.
It's redundant,
It's
yeah.
redundant is what I would say, because it's always a good day to talk about movies, especially. We like to have our little weather forecast right in the first couple minutes here or something. Especially on a day like today out here in Southern California, where it's like I'm sitting in the middle of a cloud. I can't see 5 feet in front of my face. It's been raining for like 24 hours straight, which is quite rare for Southern California, even this time of the year. As we sit through our 11th atmospheric river, which is like something I'd never even heard of or knew what it was before this winter here. Anyway, so it's an especially wonderful day to be indoors, cozy, discussing some of our cherished favorite movies. So,
Yeah, it's sunny here, but it's cold. So who wants to?
yeah, that's right. You're way up there in Canada and Toronto, and
Yeah.
I know if I asked you what the temperature was, you would tell me in Celsius, and it wouldn't make any sense to me anyway. So I'm not even going to worry about it. Is it above or below freezing? Just tell me that.
It is above. It's 5 degrees. So.
Okay. I'm like, I don't know how. I'm
I don't
so
know. It's
bad.
like 40 or something.
I literally have no idea. You could tell me anything. You could be like, it's 87. I'd be like, okay, sure.
It's 103. But yeah, so speaking of, well, this is completely
Movies.
unrelated, but
unrelated.
of Celsius versus Fahrenheit. That's the medical community uses metric, and what part of the medical community are we talking about today? But drugstores with Gus Van Sant's Drugstore Cowboy. You like that segue there, huh?
Wow, now that was a segue, buddy. That was a reach.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh,
It's my
yeah.
specialty.
So yeah, that is correct. This is my choice, and
Yes, your choice,
and I'm if for like scrutinous listeners or careful listeners out there might detect a theme in some of the films that I have selected during these many episodes that we've been around now. But this is an American film directed by Gus Van Sant that was released in 1989. It was written by James Fogle from his, it's based on his book, Drugstore Cowboy.
Yeah.
Where the screenplay wasn't written by him, but based on the book of an actual real junkie who actually
Which
wrote this
I
in prison.
believe hadn't been released when the
That's correct.
movie came out, right? Yeah.
That's correct. The book had not been published previous to the release of this film. It was, of course, afterwards, and it's my understanding, I don't know if it's still the case, that it's the only one of Fogle's writings that has been published. And I don't know if that's actually accurate, like up to this point in time right now exactly. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of common themes here in some movies that I've picked. I'm pretty fond of these kind of like late 80s, early 90s. This film was important to me for a lot of reasons. Personally, we'll get into that. But it's part of this like kind of golden era of films from my childhood, from the late 80s and early 90s. This resurgence of independent cinema. It had a huge impact on me. We've already had a couple other films that kind of fall into this similar category, like we had Coppola's Rumblefish, which also starred Dylan. We've had Barfly, which is
With Van Sant. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, Barfly, which I kind of put in this similar category of
Similar
films.
subject matter.
And what else did we have?
We had My Own Private Idaho.
My Own Private Idaho, which was the first
one,
Gus Van Sant film that we discussed. So this is the second. I'm not sure, but is this the first time that we've discussed a second film from a director? I'm not positive on that. I don't know. I can't think of another one.
But yeah, I don't want to say yes and then have be proven completely wrong.
Technically,
fact checked.
Technically, it's not. Technically, it's not, because
Herzog.
I remember one of our earlier episodes where we switched kind of formats and started talking about films more broadly as opposed to just focusing on Werner Herzog. We talked about, I think, a couple films from Spielberg, if I'm not mistaken. You had picked, I think, a couple, and we had talked about the original Mad Max trilogy from George Miller, all in one episode. So I think we have talked about multiple films from the same director before, but not exactly like this, where we've had entire separate episodes dedicated to them.
You know what's funny? Just a quick aside, 2 seconds.
Sock it to me.
And because I find it funny that a lot of times when I think people, and perhaps if you're listening right now, you might have joined us well into this podcast, maybe 50 episodes in or something, and I find when I'm listening to podcasts, I don't go back often and listen to really old episodes unless it's like I'm bored. I was actually listening last night to some of our older episodes, and it is funny because it's like, I don't know, I noticed that I've sounded really young and lively and different, and I think it's weird because I was like, why do I sound so different to myself? And well, then I realized, we've been doing this for, what is it now, like 3 years? Like, it's been
you're just an old man now. You went from
I've just aged so heavily.
So you feel like in 3 years you've gone from a young, vibrant, energetic, optimistic child, almost young adult. Let's say.
I went from Matt
child.
Dillon in this to The Priest. Basically.
Yeah, and now you're this like cynical, jaded, salty old man. I mean, oh my gosh! In 3 years span, Cullen.
I know.
I'm scared to.
That's what the world does to you.
I'm scared to think of how I've aged. I mean, I was old to begin with, so now I guess I'm, I'm like a ghost speaking.
It's like
from
the
beyond
Shyamalan
the grave.
movie, except it's the podcast that makes you old instead of the beach.
It's the podcast that makes you old. All right, well,
let's jump into it.
My name is Bob, and this is a picture of me. It was 1971, and me and my friends had just got an apartment in Portland, Oregon.
You alone? What'd you think? I brought my rat-faced granny along to hold my hand?
That's Rick, my old partner. Every once in a while, we'd get restless. Hey! Hit the local points of interest.
What have you guys been doing? Reading Mickey Spillane or something?
It just seems like the other day I was saying, it looks like Bobby Hughes has finally slowed down a little bit, and then bang, you knock off another pharmacy.
Honey? Oh. That's Diane right there. I like Diane. She took a darn good picture, too. Better than in real life.
Right out of the clear blue sky, you say you're gonna clean up your hand.
Diane, I can't do it anymore. I'm going straight, man. You ought to try it sometime. It's good for the soul.
Thing is, no matter how good a rip-off artist you are, sooner or later, you pay the price.
So what we always love to do, and I'm really excited, is to hear. So this is the first time you've ever seen the film. You've not seen it before. So I'll be really interested to kind of compare and contrast. I saw the film for the first time when I was quite young. This film came out when I was probably 12 or 13. I did not see it at the theater, and I didn't rent it. I almost certainly, or at least I don't recall renting it, originally when I first saw it for the first time. So my guess is, although I don't have a specific exact recollection, was that I probably saw this when it was out on cable, probably saw it on HBO or something similar, and, probably had no idea what it was. It came on, and it's not something that your generation would kind of understand or know, like the viewing habits of people back in the day, but you just watched whatever the hell was on.
Yeah.
And so, but I remember so I probably would have been 13, 14 years old when I first saw it. And I just remember it having I loved the film. I was intrigued by the film, by the world that it created, by the performances and the direction, and became a big fan of Gus Van Sant's work. And so, yeah, I mean, I think very fondly back to this film. It's kind of like we'd kind of touched on. It was part of a series of films that kind of had a similar theme that spoke to me, which was that a lot of films I really loved were about outcasts or outsiders or people kind of living on the edge of society or maybe completely outside it. And I think I felt like that, and I think a lot of us, or probably all of us, as part of the human condition, have felt like that at various points in time where you kind of feel estranged from the world, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so I think that aspect of a lot of these films spoke to me. I was always really interested, too, in kind of getting a peek inside another world that I had no exposure to. And I was always fascinated by that. Films that kind of showed a totally different way of living or different type of personality. Just a different world was like extremely intriguing to me. So it's kind of falls into a theme of films about outsiders and outcasts that I've just always been drawn to. But then I haven't seen the film in a very long time. So I would say probably like watching this film now in preparation for this podcast is the first time I've seen the film in maybe a decade or so. So I won't go into, I'm curious before I go into like what I thought on this current viewing to kind of hear a little bit about your first time experience here, what your thoughts were.
Oh, I really liked it. I think I liked it more than, and I liked My Own Private Idaho a lot, and I think I liked it more than even that.
Yeah.
I don't know, something about just the style in which it's done, and the Robert Yeoman's work on it was beautiful. Like there's a lot of really really good looking stuff in here. It's grimy and textured and very raw. I thought Matt Dillon was great. I think the subject matter, again, kind of like you said, really is sort of relatable in a way. These characters are people that are, you're rooting for them in a weird way. It's like even before Matt Dillon decides to kind of give up on the life and straighten himself out, you're kind of like you're watching him run through that hospital hoping that he gets away with stealing pharmaceutical drugs. I thought that was really interesting. I think that one funny thing is just that it's like the most attractive group of drug users and dealers and addicts in history, probably.
So, I think I want to pause on that for a minute because I think it's hysterical. So it's like definitely one of the contrasts that I had, now, right? Watching it now versus watching it as a 13 or 14-year-old. It's like I didn't think about that at all when I was a kid, right? When I was so young, it was like, oh, wow, look how because I'm a kid. I grew up in a totally sanitized suburban environment. I mean, not totally sanitized, but you understand. I mean, this is not a world I know anything about. And I was just they're like stealing drugs, and it's like these clothes, the inserts of the the spoon and the needle, and I think this was before there was I feel like there was Pulp Fiction especially really kind of brought this subject matter and this way of shooting drug users into a mainstream that I don't know was exactly around yet at this year.
It's sort of a not perhaps in the contemporary meaning of the word, but sort of a romanticization of the like the
but
sexiness
it felt
of
grittier.
It in a way.
But it felt grittier is what I was going to say. Is like back then it felt like it was grittier. And you've got an overdose. You have it felt so much grittier, and especially you've got Burroughs. William S. Burroughs coming in at the end, and he's this haggard old lifetime junkie. Kind of
priest
speaking his wisdom and truth, and you've got these kind of. This like long-term motels with the hot plates and the it's like all this world. It's like wet and rainy, and it's Portland, and it's and I felt it was so much grittier. And I watch it now, and you're right. It's like, oh my gosh, everybody's so beautiful. It's like,
I mean, even,
it's like Heather Graham is like 18 or something in this film and looks as fresh as anybody could ever possibly look. You've got, Matt Dillon is handsome.
Matt Dillon looks
and
great.
young and looking great.
That's what I think that, and I loved the movie, but I just thought that was so funny is that like when he goes to rehab, there's like no physical change for him. Like he just kind of puts on like a button-up shirt instead of a leather jacket.
100%. And when Kelly Lynch comes back, of course, she's great in this film.
Yeah.
And she's beautiful and wonderful in this film. And, she comes back at the end of the film, to kind of reach out to Bob Dylan's character when he's in his kind of long-term hotel on methadone, and he's working his job. He's clean now on maintenance methadone, but other than that, clean. And and she comes back, and it's like, okay, now she's with the James the Grouse character. who what's his name? James' character in this is Rick.
Rick. Yeah.
Is
yeah.
you know, and
Who's
of course
Nadine,
Rick,
who overdosed ex-boyfriend.
correct. And Rick is a good-looking guy. Everybody's fresh and young-looking, and she comes back anyway. And it's supposed to kind of be, there's been some hard times. They're still running. They're still robbing. She's still using, and she comes back, and it's like she just looks as fresh as a flower. Just as like stylishly dressed, well manicured and maintained. Skin is perfect. Hair is perfect. And I guess it's funny how when I was younger, it did feel so much more raw. When you look at it now, it's like, wow, all these characters they look perfect skin, perfect hair,
Well, I
people.
find it interesting too. And I'll get back to my kind of like my experience watching in a second, but that Tom Waits was Van Sant's first choice to play the Bob character, Matt Dillon's character.
That would have been different.
And I think that what's interesting to me about that is because Matt Dillon looks young and feels young in this movie, but
yes.
but I think it's kind of clear in the writing though that he is supposed to be older, and sort of like when he's talking about after Nadine Heather Graham overdoses and they're in the kitchen, Kelly Lynch and Matt Dillon are in the kitchen having this conversation about like, all these kids don't know how to rob, they don't know like the lifestyle of running and stuff. And I remember when they're having that conversation, I'm like, you guys all sort of look the same age.
Yeah,
like Rick especially doesn't look particularly younger, but that kind of fell into place for me when I realized, Tom Waits, like it was clear kind of, because even Kelly Lynch is older than Matt Dillon.
Yeah.
So it's clear in the writing to me that, and that's not a knock at Matt Dillon. I think he does a fantastic job with the role, but that it's clear that his character is written as kind of like an older, more experienced user, and that does come across like he's clearly the leader of the group. But I do think it's interesting knowing that Tom Waits was in consideration.
Sure.
And kind of the first choice for it was. Yeah.
It is my understanding too. I think you're right on the money. It's my understanding too that in the book, in Fogel's book, and I actually have read it, but it's been a very long time since I have. It's my understanding that the character of Bob was meant to be quite a bit older. And I think Dillon was likely cast, I think he's great in it. So it's not that I think that he's miscast or that anything's wrong here. I think he actually overcomes this issue of him physically actually, in real life being young and kind of looking younger.
Yeah.
I think he does a good job of overcoming that with his performance. And I think we so it almost kind of turns it into, interestingly, it turns it into somebody who is actually literally old to someone who's actually an old soul is kind of what it turns into.
Yeah.
He's a guy with an old soul. He kind of harkens back to an era that's even before his time. He himself was raised on television. We're in 71, I think, is when this when the picture is set. He himself grew up on television just a decade earlier. And I think it's almost like he's kind of removed from his own generation, which actually I feel like works great. That
it does, yeah. It kind of, that's another thing that I would say kind of reminded me of Barfly in a way, which is that Mickey Rourke in that doesn't feel old, but feels like an old soul. Like feels kind of like in that way that it's like, you look at the person and you see how they talk and interact, and it's like, they've lived 1,000 lives,
Yeah, but they're only like 30 years old.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really, really fascinating. And very well done. I mean, Matt Dillon.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
Great.
You mentioned, and it's interesting you mentioned. I want you to keep going, but I like to kind of touch on these things as you mention them. Is that I feel like Kelly, and I'm not aware of what their actual ages are. I didn't go and look these things up, what their actual ages are when they shot the film. But from a performance, from a stage, from a presence perspective, Kelly does feel like the eldest character in this film. Not in that she looks old or something, but she seems the most mature. She seems the most kind of, she's got the most gravitas.
Most mature and almost the most jaded as well. Like she's had the worst lick of life of any of them, and is kind of the least patient with the younger two, and sort of isn't a nasty person in the movie. I mean, she's got some like nasty bits where she basically says, kick her out.
She's on a mission.
But
she's on a mission.
Exactly. She's a very fascinating
Matter of
character
fact.
in this.
Yeah, I agree. Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, let's hear more because I think that's an interesting observation.
Yeah, I think I was surprised at how funny a lot of it was.
Me too.
And like when he sets the
there's a lot of humor in this.
When he sets James Ramar's partner up to be shot, and it's like
hysterical.
the most elaborate idea of like, okay, I'm gonna go talk to the neighbor and I'm gonna tell him that I saw someone so that he looks like he's angry at me and it looks like we're acquaintances. So then it's
almost
really,
slapstick.
really, really funny. I was laughing.
It's almost slapstick, isn't it?
Yeah.
There were a lot of these moments.
Yeah, even like the bit with the when they see that the convenience store the window's left open and they climb into. I don't know why there was a lot of like very physical comedy of that was just kind of this feeling of like being on the drugs or this desperation that gets so ridiculous. And I think that was a really good choice on Van Sant's part, which is that he seems to like heighten these ridiculous elements and the when the first time Matt Dillon shoots up in the movie and there's like needles floating through the air and cows and the house, and it's like that's probably not at all what it looks or feels like to do opiates and to inject them and things like that, but it's not supposed to me. It's a heightened artistic interpretation of,
it sets
of
a
just
mood
chaos and things like that.
And a tone. Yeah. I mean, it's like a dream state. It's kind of like this dream state, this like, almost like kind of floating in limbo, and kind of just the world is kind of floating by you, or you're kind of floating through it. And it's just, his head is again in this moment that you're talking about, the first of several of these kind of, I don't know if I'd call them montages, but these kind of really brief dream sequences almost, where we're kind of let into his mind or his psyche, if you will, while he's under the influence of these drugs. But I just to go back to what you were saying about the comedy, that was something that I don't know that I picked up on as much, or at least I don't remember as much from my viewings as a younger kid, where now I felt like there was almost a comedic button in like every scene, whether it's like, when they're getting busted by the cops, when they come in to search the house, we have this like fun moment with the golf clubs, and he's like, "Oh, please, man, those are my Ben Hogans, don't break my golf clubs, man," and we see like the cop even has some, the detective has some sensitivity. He's like, all right, just break a couple and then leave them alone,
It kind of felt a bit Coen Brothers-y in a lot of it. Even when at the end when and what's the young guy's name David, I think the younger kind of drug dealer that
so the like blonde-haired guy across the street
that shoots him at the end, right?
So Max Perlich is the actor who played him, and I want to talk about him too when you finish your thought. But
well that moment when he comes in and the finale of the film,
in the finale of the film,
them beating him up, and Matt Dillon's like, David? Like, the guy's not even good at disguising himself at all.
Well, and he looks ridiculous even.
Yeah, he's wearing this like funny little mask. Yeah.
In this he basically almost looks like a clown. Basically kind of they've kind of, Gus Van Sant has kind of designed this mask to almost look like a clown with the red nose. He basically looks kind of,
and you can
clownish.
see like he's got kind of like buck teeth almost, and they kind of you can see them through the
and just the way that Perlich is playing this character, which I think is hysterical. And it was a performance. It stood out to me when I was a kid, and it stands out to me again. He's a pivotal player, but he doesn't spend the character is
probably only got 5 or 6 minutes screen time. Yeah,
he's extremely important to the plot, but he doesn't have a lot of screen time. But I found his performance to just be hysterical. I thought it was absolutely just fun. His energy, it's kind of off the wall. And I just thought he was a hoot. But so I was really impressed with Max Perlich's performance. But there's just so many moments of comedy in this that I don't know that I got when I was younger. I mean, when they're removing Nadine's dead body from the attic where they had to store it for a few days, and it just, it's like Nadine, or Diane is downstairs, and she's supposed to be there to catch or to help, Bob lower the body down the attic stairs, and she's just like, she's not there, and he drops the body, and it's just like, he's looking down at her, and she's looking up at him like, what?
Yeah, you know, it on a whole, it's definitely a lighter tone than My Own Private Idaho. And I think I expected it to be sort of tonally similar to that. And
yeah,
but no, I mean, even, you know, you bring up the dead body, but even the moment when they find, like, arguably the darkest scene in the movie, when they find that she's overdosed,
right?
And there is a really, like, touching moment where Rick is you know,
holding her,
and things like that.
Yeah.
But Matt Dillon comes in and he's like, "Get the hat off the bed." And
yeah.
Out about,
well,
you know,
and I think it speaks to, you know, the kind of single-mindedness and the coldness and the, you know, the I mean, and I think it's like what we see here, and I want to talk about this more, you know, as we go through it. But this theme of, you know, and of course I think we can extrapolate, right, this theme to mean so many things that we've all experienced. Where it's maybe we don't have the same experience of being addicted to a drug that kind of takes our life in a direction where we're almost single-handedly focused on that thing. But I think many people, I certainly know what it's like to, at different points in my life, be so singularly focused on something that you kind of lose track of a lot of other things. I mean, you could even take this in a smaller example of, let's say, I mean, how many times have you been on set, or you've worked with somebody, or maybe you yourself have been directing something, and you're so single-handedly focused on the accomplishment of your day, or the completion of the film, or whatever it is you're working on, that you're like, you're not listening to people. You're not taking anybody else into account. You're not listening to their emotions or their feelings or their needs or whatever. And it's just like, I have this thing that I am doing, and I'm getting it done at any, you know, by any means necessary. You know what I mean? It's like, this and I think probably many filmmakers who are listening, or many artists who are listening, I think we've all kind of been in places where our obsession with our art, our craft, can kind of cause us to be single-minded. But all people from any walks of life can experience this. But we really see that there, where he's like, hey, you should be mad. Not, you know, you shouldn't be sad. She took your cut, man. Like, you should be. She deserved it. She deserved it. You know, your woman took your cut. And of course, you know, we have Rick act out in. He doesn't go so far as to actually hit Bob,
but he punches the door.
But he punches the door,
Yeah.
and he's not even trying to hit Bob. So we see like the command or the respect that Bob has over his crew, even at his coldest, when he's treating them the most ruthlessly. You know, they won't act out against him, at least directly. You're right. We do see that one of the more tender moments of the film, then when Rick is holding Nadine's dead hand and comments on her feeling cold.
And I gotta say, I kind of, you know, I also liked the heightened kind of idea of like the high concept of the whole movie, which is just these people are so desperate for drugs that they rob drugstores.
And they just from one to another to another to another.
And it's like a you know, obviously it's very much like a bank, intentionally so, like a bank robbery movie of heists, and except, you know, I just love the way in which that the things are shot like heists, and yet because it's not a bank, everybody that they're stealing from is more so just confused than anything.
Yeah.
Like when they do the
point.
donuts in the parking lot, and everyone just sort of comes out like, what the hell's going on?
These are great scenes. So absolutely. I mean, another thing that I think stood out to me again, more so now, was that I think it was the tone. I don't know, I almost feel like it was the tone that impacted me more when I was younger. And it wasn't so much, you know, any independent, like, one thing. Like, I think I kind of missed a little bit of the comedy, and I think I kind of missed some of these heist elements that you talk about, which are actually, they're humorous again, but they're also really interestingly shot and well staged. I want to talk about that. But yeah, those things kind of came into greater relief for me now, those details. Also, I guess some of this could be memory. I mean, we are talking about something that I saw, you know, almost 35 years ago. So maybe that's the issue, is just that it's only the imprint of the emotion that remains in your memory of that first viewing, sadly. But I agree with you. I thought it was hysterical from the very first time we see them work, in the very beginning of the film, where Nadine acts out, fakes a seizure, and Bob is running to the back of the store to go through the medications. And of course, like, nothing is really locked down too much. It's just, he's just pulling up, wooden drawers open with all these bottles of pills. I don't think that's how it works anymore.
No, I
don't think you could do
more.
this.
Yeah.
I don't
Probably
think
all locked up and
yeah. It's the world has changed from this, and I don't think a person could do the kind of things that they get away with there.
Well, I think what's interesting about it is that I don't know anything about this, but my guess is from also the reaction of the other characters in the film when he's in rehab, is that this wasn't a very common thing to do. Period.
Right.
Like that it wasn't like there was gangs roving the streets and robbing drugstores for drugs. That this is quite intentionally a extreme degree of addiction that's played up for the movie. And I'm sure 100% that there have been people who have robbed drugstores for
Well, I think James Fogle.
Like
The man who wrote it actually was in prison for this, and
for doing it,
and was released and then recaptured multiple times until his death. For this exact crime, for this exact crime. So
I think that's what's interesting, though, is that it's like, it's kind of a look at, when we talk about as a writer, you should always be raising the stakes. Of course, this is like the highest stake there can be in terms of drug use, where you're not buying from a dealer, you're not, and that's pretty much where most drug movies go, is that addiction is quite not normalized in a sense of like, it's treated as normal, but they very rarely do they decide to go kind of, again, high concept with it almost in a way, which I loved about this, that there's this like you said, kind of this slapstick comedy almost to a lot of it. And
it's not, it's light in a lot of ways. I mean, and especially if we compare this to a lot of more current films, I think, or other films that have been released that have to do with drugs and addiction. What we don't see is this melodramatic, we don't see this trying to play up, oh my gosh, it's drugs and this is so horrible. It's not like, this isn't Requiem for a Dream. This isn't, we don't see these characters really suffering because of their drug use. We don't see them in pain or agony or withdrawal, really. We don't see, any of the, we don't see illness. We don't see homelessness. We don't see, any like real we don't see them living, living in the alleyway, right? Like filthy. I mean, again, like you said, they're pretty, they're beautiful, their skin is perfect, they're well fed, they have homes. So I almost feel like, tell me what you think about this, that it's the movie's not really so much about drugs or what addiction is or any of those things. I think it's almost kind of more that when I watched it this time, that Bob is just almost more addicted actually to the thrill of the score.
Yes. Yeah.
Like any other kind of heist movie might be, right? It's almost like in Heat, when Tom Sizemore, rest in peace, when his character is like, man, it's about the juice.
Yeah.
Of course I'm in.
Yeah, and even like De Niro is kind of like, I'm never going to stop. That's kill me when that's how I'm going to stop.
It's like the frog and the scorpion. I'm the scorpion. It's like, this is what I do and I'm good at it. And I think Bob really takes pride in his ability. It's like, boom, he notices the transom windows.
Well, actually, that's a fascinating point to make too, because I think to me that's, if you, again, comparing this to other movies of similar subject matter, like there's not even a lot of moments of Matt Dillon or anyone really being like high in the movie. There's select moments, but
only a couple times. Yeah, I mean, so there's a very specifically, and it's the time that I noticed most this time, is when instead of doing like and I always get these wrong, opiate, but something in that class of drugs. Instead of doing that, I think he's just recently done Speed, right? I think that he bought or traded off the Max Perlich's character.
Yeah.
And you see him like David is his character's name. You see, and he's kind of alone in the living room with Diane, and she's like wanting to kind of fool around and make love. and he is like, he's on speed. He's like grinding his jaw. He's like bouncing his legs. He's got like, he's kind of covered in sweat, and he's just, super focused on, oh my gosh, this like one score we could do. There's this one score. Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's go. It's really the only time that I feel like we really see like a intense physicalization
yes.
Of drug use is just that one time. We do have these moments like you had mentioned where he shoots up in the car and we kind of have this, little fantasy dreamlike limbo montage. But it's not really like in his physical presentation or performance. We only see it in this time on Speed. But even then, I mean, I think that scene there also shows like he's so preoccupied with the score. I mean, he's got plenty of drugs. Like they just scored a ton of drugs. It's like he's good at this. It's what he knows how to do. It's what he does. And it's like all of this kind of history of film, this lineage of films that are like, I'm a boxer, so I'm going to box. I'm a bank robber. I'm going to rob banks. It's almost kind of like this, well, this is what I'm good at.
He almost specifically refers to it as like a high too. Like he's like when they rob the store that the transom's open, and then he's like, well, I've got to go do a hospital now because I got to get the next big hit.
Well, and he's fantasizing about it, right? He's like, these bottles, all these bottles, and the blue, he's like fetishizing all of the the whole process, fetishizing the bottles they come in and the colors of the capsules, and and it's not like he's not approaching it from a perspective of I gotta like get my drugs so I don't go into withdrawal and feel horrible, right? It's not like I gotta get these drugs to feel this great high.
Yeah, he doesn't feel desperate.
It's literally like I gotta do this because he's like fetishized the process of robbing pharmacies and like getting away with it. It's and I think even the cat and mouse game with the detectives, he loves that. So kind of going back to Heat, right? It's almost that's kind of part of it. It's like everybody's got a role to play, right? The cop and the criminal aren't really much different. They just happen to be on different sides of a law, but they're really kind of the same personality-wise, right? The detective kind of gets off on the chase, and the criminal kind of gets off on the on the chase as well. And you see, like you had mentioned, that scene that you thought was really humorous where and I think it's hysterical. I didn't remember this really, where Bob kind of fakes, forges this note that's like, from a neighbor, and he gives it to the detective, and it's like describes this whole process of how he's actually keeping drugs in his neighbor's home, and he's like thrown this ball of yarn, onto
to slide them across.
To like slide, to kind of like pulley system,
But it's totally fake. It's totally
fake.
Up.
He sets up this whole ruse where we see him like he opens his window, throws the yarn over there, totally unbeknownst to the neighbor, and he sets up this whole ruse, and you can see. I love this moment when his neighbor first comes over to the door, and it's like this 90-year-old lady, white-haired woman, and she's like, hey, and she's so naive, and she comes over and she's super sweet, and Dylan opens the door, Bob opens the door, Rick's right behind him, and it's like, I mean, anybody else would look at these two and be like, okay, what in the hell are you up to in the middle of the night? These two guys like covered in sweat, but it's like they look like they're, been up all night doing something, right? And she's looking at him and she's like, oh, I don't mean to disturb you, but I think I saw some nefarious person in the neighborhood. And you just see Bob's eyes light up where we see him getting the idea. Like he's getting the idea like, aha, it's okay. I know Gentry is almost certainly surveilling me right now. I've got this idea. And I just love that moment. You can see his eyes light up in the same way they light up when he's planning and thinking about and fantasizing about a score. So to me, that's what I feel like this character is really addicted to. And of course,
what does he do when the cop does get shot? Is he like rips open the curtains like it's a show?
It's a performance. And so that's such a great point. I love that. I love this moment where we literally have Bob is like the director of this scene that we're about to see. He's like set the stage. He's going to open the curtain.
He's got an audience.
He's got an audience, and literally the audience is like, hey, I need to get my smokes.
Yeah,
hey, I need to
beer.
get my beer. And he's like, guys, you're going to miss it. You're going to miss it. And it's just like, I feel like that's me when I'm like screening a film for my friends, and they're like, I'm like, you can't leave right now. Like, this is the best part.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's where, like, I feel like it's so relatable. And this, I feel like, is really a beautiful kind of micro moment that encapsulates this symbology where, you know, I almost can see, like, Bob is Gus Van Sant. And, you know, Van Sant, like so many filmmakers, like, I mean, look, I'm obsessed with cinema, dude. I mean, I spend more time doing something related to cinema than practically anything else, you know, in my life. And it's been maybe like one of the only couple things that my interest in has never waned. I have never stopped loving cinema. I have never stopped wanting to be a part of cinema. At some points in my life, like when I was really actively pursuing a career as an actor in Los Angeles, I was extremely single-minded to the detriment of like all other kind of aspects of my life. And I almost can sense that, you know, it's like that Gus Van Sant might be speaking a little bit through Bob, you know, here. That it's that thrill of whether it's writing or whether it's directing on set or whether it's editing or whatever, you know, whatever kind of aspect really turns your crank about filmmaking, that I could just totally see that Bob is Gus Van Sant right there in that moment.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
I love that scene.
And it's it's like, I was laughing so hard as you're watching it's almost sort of like also like a Rube Goldberg machine. Like he's like watching, there's the ladder. He's climbing the ladder. The light goes on. There's him with his shotgun. He's coming outside and like, it's like this, it's like he's spent this last, 15 minutes of screen time setting up this elaborate machine, this elaborate play.
Yeah, it's for sure.
And then knocks over the domino, right?
And that domino obviously could have ended like, if this were another film, I could imagine that would have been like, the cop is shot and killed, and now he's got a murder on his hands. Yeah. And, it's this really, see how horrible drugs are? Do you see what this can lead you to? Like, this is so horrible. But what happens is that he does get shot, but we know immediately he's okay. Mm-hmm. And the worst thing that's happened is he's just been booted down to a lower level.
He's embarrassed,
Yeah, he's embarrassed. And Gentry's not really upset. And it's all treated kind of fairly lightly, right? As so much is. And I find that's, what I think one of the things that I really do love about Gus Van Sant's work, and I've actually not seen all of his films. There are quite a few more I need to see. But of those I have, often I see, I really appreciate that he doesn't judge or criticize his characters, which is really important for me. It's generally a big turnoff for me when I feel a lot of like, here's what you should think about something, and I'm going to like keep telling you this is what you should think about it. Not a big fan of that in films. When films kind of get didactic or worse. And so I really love that he allows his characters to exist, and he doesn't judge them. He doesn't criticize them. That's up to you to do, whether you want to, if you want to or not. And so what that translates to me is that there's a lot of empathy and compassion for all types of people in his work. And I really appreciate that. That comes across strongly to me. That's something that I noticed and impacted me when I was young too. And we talked about that some for my own Private Idaho. How I really noticed that, and I think it impacted my own personal horizons of empathy and expanded them.
Yes.
But it's also, I mean, he's got such a sense of humor. We've talked about that. So not only is he not judgmental, not only is he not critical, but he sees the humor in even the most fringe kind of ways that a person could live. Because this film there's so many dark things this film could have gone into about what this lifestyle actually could be like in real life. But in this particular slice, in this film, he really treats it lightly with humor. Now, it's not that there's no gravitas. There clearly is, and when we get to the end of the film, I think we see that. And William,
it's dark humor too. It's not,
and it's dark, yeah. Very dark, and we've got a little dramatic irony that we'll get to that he ends it on, which is different than the book, where the character actually dies in the book. But here we're kind of left to decide for ourselves what happens. But yeah, I think
to make just another quick point about that too is that, like,
doesn't even have to be quick. I'm loving this.
Well, yeah, I think that it's just really fascinating to me that talking about, again, heightening situations, raising the stakes, and it's like, okay, we've got a house, we're renting like a motel room.
Oh yeah.
Long term.
Yep.
And we've got it full of drugs. Now we have someone who's overdosed and died. We've got to hide them in the same place that we're hiding the attic. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's where we're hiding the drugs. And then what happens but a sheriff's convention is in town. And so it's like, not only is it just like that there's a sheriff that's like, hey, I smell something funny, what's going on in here? It's literally every room at this motel is now being taken over by a sheriff, and they are kicked out. But what do they have to do but transport the body while all these sheriffs are pulling up, and it's just filled with, like, the parking lot is all these different, cop cruisers and things like that. And it's a great, it's tense as an audience member, but it's tense in sort of a, I almost want to say
way. It's like a comedy.
Yeah,
it's like a comedy of errors.
After Hours.
Yeah.
Like the Scorsese After Hours, where you just feel like, despite the fact that the world is kind of throwing all this shit at our main character, he is kind of loving the excitement of it all. And I know that sort of scares him into it, but then what we realize later, and what is hinted at, is that he's not even scared out of this lifestyle because he thinks he's going to die, or thinks, he talks about the fact that he's afraid of going to prison. But it's more so the fear of prison isn't necessarily the fear of prison. It's the fear of not being able to continue doing what he loves doing. And he talks about, okay, like, I made a deal with a higher power. If I can get out and I can bury this body, I can, I'm going to go and I'm going to get myself clean. And then that's of course the dramatic irony at the end of the film.
So I think, before we get to that, we get to the end of the film, because I think you've touched on something that's important to the film. It's a huge theme, and we haven't talked about it yet, which is this superstition that this superstitious kind of beliefs that they have, and are motivated by, and especially by Bob. We really get a sense that, Bob is probably the instigator, right, of all these superstitious beliefs. Now, Diane's been with him for so long that she has, like, accepted this, I think, and fully, believes in Bob's strict codes to avoid bad luck and to take advantage of good luck. Rick and Nadine really are kind of like, Nadine obviously goes so far to spite Bob's, actively go against Bob's superstitious beliefs, and we aren't quite sure if she overdoses on purpose or accident. We don't know if she kills herself kind of to spite them, or does she overdose because she's naive and she doesn't really know what she's doing.
Because they do set up that idea that a little bit of this can kill you, the drug that she takes.
So we don't know. Now she doesn't seem in any way, shape, fashion, or form to have suicidal tendencies before this, but we do have her feelings really, really hurt right before this.
She breaks down.
She's in a broken down, really depressed, sad state. So it could go either way. We don't know. But of course, to Bob, it totally reinforces his beliefs in superstition. She put a hat on a bed, she's dead. Boom, right? He's got his rule about dogs. He has his rule about hats. I mean, he's very, very, very moved by these things. We have this really beautiful moment, I think, where Diane and Bob are sitting alone in, like, a dark bedroom, or with just one little nightstand light on there, and they're trying to kind of figure out, like, where are we in the world? Like, they're trying to kind of unravel the mysteries of how luck works, which is, like, quite beautiful to me, actually. I think it's a really wonderful scene, and I think we all do this in our own ways. If it's not luck so much as, like, well, how does the universe work, damn it, right? Like,
it's incredibly exploratory. It's very clearly using the life of, drugs and things like that as a stand-in for larger questions, which I found very fascinating. Like, it's not, and I think that's part of what really elevated the movie for me, was that, like, you go into a movie and you expect it to be, again, like you said, Requiem for a Dream, where it's just this depressing, gross out, this is how awful drug use is, which it is. Don't get me wrong, I'm not disagreeing with the thesis of any movie that says, hardcore drug addiction is bad. I think that's a pretty easy line to land on, but
it's reductive to do that.
But I think it's exactly, it's like we know that, what's the point in making a movie where you're just gonna point out
you've removed the humanity about it.
Well, like, the humanity and the agency of the characters in a lot of ways, too.
Exactly. And that's where it's like, instead of making a movie about drugs and drug use, you make a movie about humans who happen to also take drugs. That's a big difference. That's a huge difference too.
And again, use that drug use, you don't have to make it the most realistic portrayal of what that is like. And that's kind of why I made the joke about, like, oh yeah, these are all the most attractive drug addicts I've ever seen. But it doesn't matter. Like, it's not something that I was watching and I wasn't taken out of the movie by any chance, because I think the film exists in that subject matter with not a wink, but more so a higher reading of the material. It's taking the idea, like you said, where it's like, where do we fit in the universe? What's with these superstitions? It's not even, again, the addiction for Bob isn't even necessarily the drugs, it's the chase. And it's fitting in and being an outsider and all these really interesting elements that, especially as, someone in my early 20s, I can definitely relate to this feeling of, like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Like, where's
it doesn't
everything
change.
going?
Don't worry. You're going to have but I think that really is so pivotal. I think it's a really wonderful thing that they explore in this film, and there are certainly some questions I think we're all, or almost all of us, or most of us, I'm assuming, this is like such a foundational part of the human condition, that we're all struggling or wondering or trying to find our purpose in life. Right? What are we making of our life? Why are we here? Right? What are we doing? I think purpose is that's the question. What is your purpose to me? And I think that's what Bob is like, what these characters are dealing with. And I think, like we've talked already so much about, that he's found something he's good at and he wants to do it, But he also, there's this really beautiful little short monologue there where he talks about how, one of the reasons that these people are taking drugs is because, and one of the things that drugs does for these people is that how you're going to feel all the time. Just look at the label, and so it's like trying to find or make some order in this chaos that is existence, in this confusion, and this like existential, like wacky, like whirlpool of a soupy mess that we all live in, and that we struggle with. That hey, like you might look at me on the outside and say, you're a horrible, drug user, addict, whatever. But it's like, I found order, man. I found a way to have order. I found a way to know what's going to happen from one moment to another. And for Bob, I found my purpose. I'm really good at this. I might be the best at this. And I found my family. And, so I guess that's what I really appreciate about Van Sant's approach to this subject matter, and approach to this film. That you don't see in a lot of other films. That's what stood out to me. That's what stands out to me.
Well, do you remember when it came out, if it was controversial?
I really don't. I don't. I so wish that I had a better
I'd be curious, just because again, it's not like an indictment of the lifestyle.
I think it was praised. So. I mean, so in general, now I don't remember what the response was in real time back when I was 12 years old. But I know that it was a well-received film. It was, a very small box office response, but it was made its money back. It was theatrically released. I think it found a pretty good following on, cable and home rentals after the fact. And, it was pretty critically acclaimed, and it allowed Gus Van Sant to go on to have the career he's had. So I think I think the value of the film was recognized in its time for sure.
Well, I actually want to touch on that too. You mentioned home video and things like that, and I think that's I think it's a conversation we both kind of wanted to have about this, which is that you've got this $2.5 million film. I think that was what the budget was.
Right.
Not unknown actors, but it's not starring Tom Cruise.
But Matt Dillon
had quite the career at this point. Outsiders.
Matt Dillon had some pull. I mean, ever since like 1980 with My Bodyguard, and then with The Outsiders in '83. The Outsiders in '83. Rumblefish was not a big hit, but of course everyone knew who Francis Ford Coppola was.
Yeah.
He was. In
Matt Dillon definitely was. I would guess kind of he was the biggest name in it.
The biggest name in the film, I think, would be a fair estimation. But it's interesting too. I just want to point out real quick. I don't mean to cut you off, but I think this is kind of interesting. And Kelly Lynch had been in a few films too, but she had been in Bright Lights, Big City, which I think is an underrated film from '88 with Michael J. Fox, who was playing against most of the characters he had played up. I think all the characters he had played up until that point. And then Cocktail, you had mentioned Tom Cruise. She actually was in a film co-starring with Tom Cruise in '88's Cocktail. And then this film, I can't remember how big of a hit it was at the time. I think it was a pretty substantial hit and went on to be huge, almost like a cult hit now, even though it was like a big hit before. But Roadhouse with Swayze. So she had been in some big films too by the time she got to Drugstore Cowboy. So I think, Lynch and Dillon were decent-sized names by the time we get to this film.
Yeah, and so it's definitely got some pull with stars and things like that. And yet, I think what's very fascinating to me, and the one thing I wanted to mention this is because you did mention the home video release, is that like it was even a big budget movie back 20 years ago. Was difficult to lose money on, even if it didn't do great in its theatrical release. Well, now you've got home video, you've got rentals, you've got like all this stuff. Whereas I think in the world of streaming, I think one of the reasons that we've lost this kind of low budget, mid budget drama, not that this is quite low budget, but anywhere from like $1 to $30 million movies are just so rare these days. Is because there is no chance. Like studios don't want to take chance on doing something that's like really low investment in quotation marks, air quotes, because there is no aftermarket for it. It's just going to go onto streaming. It's going to be licensed and
it'll be lost.
It's so hard to make It's so hard to make money back on streaming.
It's tough.
I think it's really fascinating how like home video, how huge of a market that was, and now I still. I know you definitely do, and I definitely still do as much physical media as I can. But a lot of things just aren't released on physical media. A lot of things are just out of print or just are never going to get the chance to. And so I think it's kind of fascinating how, like, would a movie like this see any theaters these days? Probably not. It would probably be like an Apple TV movie that would come out and get maybe a week of buzz or something, and it could be the exact
I don't even
same
think it would be that. Sadly, I don't even think it would be that. I think, and I'm not an expert, on these things. I'm not like an executive somewhere. I don't have inside information. So it's kind of like armchair quarterbacking here, But yes, I mean, what you like, kind of the crux of what you say is definitely true. That especially. We have VHS first. It's a huge popular medium. You've got, originally you have a lot of rentals, but then I think you did start to have a lot of purchases once the pre-recorded cassettes actually came down quite a bit in price later in VHS's life. But in the beginning, it was mostly, it was that rental revenue. But then you have DVD. And DVD, I think, really exploded the physical media sales, like actual selling physical media to people. I think that's when that really took off. And you could have a film not have to make back its money at the theater at all. And a matter of fact, a lot of studios would be like full on. We have no expectations that this film is going to make its money at the
we'll do like a slow release of maybe 100 theaters at a time,
but we know that we're going to get DVD, physical media sales. And I mean, you sell it to networks, you sell it to cable, and then you sell it to networks, and you've got rentals, and then you've got physical media sales. And so I think there was more leeway there, but I think, now we live in an era now, and I think we're in a period of big transition again. I think there's some consolidation. I think there's the streaming platforms have thrown so much money at production for quite a while now. I think the economics are going to have to shift.
Yes.
I'm not sure how that's going to shake out. I don't know if it's going to be consolidation. I don't know if that's going to be in just less money in production. But we're kind of in a sea of production right now.
Yeah. And I can't remember who described it as this, but it was some big name actor, like really, A-list, made a video. I can't remember for the life of me who it was, talking about how and who was it? I'm not even going to try and think of who it was.
Tell the story and you'll maybe remember it.
Yeah. So they were talking about how, this is an actor that's been in big movies since the 80s, I think. Okay. And they're talking about how the first time, since 2010, suddenly the industry is run by marketing and finance people. And it's not that the film industry has not always been a business. Of course, we say this a lot, that it's of course always been about, it's a business, it's making money, and that's the goal, and that's
since day one.
Unfortunate, but it's that's what it is. But he kind of said for the first time over the last few years, especially with streaming, is that now it's not only run by corporations as always, but it's run by, again, marketing and finance people rather than people who have worked their way up through Fox, from being a line producer to the head of production or whatever. And now it's more so that people are imported from tech companies, from Silicon Valley, from Facebook, from things like that, and they are running the show. And so it's no longer really got anything to do with quality or the depth of the cinema. Yeah, exactly. It's got to do only with what's a biteable, approachable. I think a really raw example of this is, and this just started maybe 5 or so years ago, but those things on YouTube where it's like the trailer before the trailer, where you've got a 5-second preview of the trailer that is you're about to watch, and it's like, well, that's just a calculation based off of the fact that most people click off of a video after 5 seconds, blah 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 blah, and it's like, but God, it does it. It's such a minor thing, but it bothers the hell out of me because I'm like, why do I need a trailer for the trailer I'm about to watch? And it's very much things like that where it's like a calculated, focus tested kind of thing. So it's interesting.
I mean, and again, I think what you're saying is fundamentally true. It's been happening for a long time. I mean, I think, originally when the studios were the studios and they weren't when they weren't small subsidiaries of other major non-related conglomerate companies, you had people generally running them who had some kind of education in and love for the actual art itself. Maybe not universally, but substantially. You had heads of studios who did love cinema and loved the world of film. And I think once those major studios, so long before streaming platforms and before it was more about tech involvement, but you had companies being bought by major conglomerates like GE, for example. It's like Sony is another example. You have these studios bought by much, much larger companies, and then that the filmmaking part of that company, then its revenue is tiny, right? Like the company that buys these studios is so much larger than the little studio they bought. Yeah. Even though we think of them as being large, but relative to the company that bought them, it's these like multinational they're making $50 billion making microwaves, right? Yeah. And the $1 billion that's being made by the studio, it's just so yeah, you've got executives now making decisions and running these companies, and of course they're public companies, they're owned by stockholders, so it's the bottom line, it's the quarterly stock price that matters. You have that started long ago, and then now, right, you've got Netflix, Apple, I don't think these companies are run by people who are in the same way as the studios of old, in love with cinema. You know, I think you're right. And so we've seen a slow progression after, the studios are bought up, become smaller parts of larger
Paramount is
conglomerates.
Viacom.
Yep.
Yeah,
Now
like
you've got streaming, and so you've got tech companies like Apple, running production for their channel, or Netflix or whatever. And so and Amazon is a great example. Amazon with Prime. So I think that is a big difference. I think also you see, streaming, also we see this continued shift. I mean, since the invention of television, we see this continued shift to people going to theaters less and less and watching more and more content at home. And so what do we see now? A story like this, instead of being told in an hour and a half or 2 hour long film, it's told over like an 8 or 10 episode TV series.
Yeah, like a mini
right?
series. Yeah.
And, I know a lot of people love being able to binge TV shows and things. What I have found, to me, more and more and more, is that really what we're actually seeing, I think there's like a golden era or second golden era, whatever people call it, of television. And some of that's true, where we had Sopranos and The Wire and Breaking Bad and Mad Men and some of these shows. But I feel like we've gone so far now that these stories are so diluted. It's like, this would have been a great story if you told it over 2 hours. But
I find
crap,
that so much.
You told this damn story over 10 hours, and like nothing is happening in an episode. Now, I want to be clear. I don't judge a story by how much quote unquote plot happens. That's not what I mean. Yeah. I just mean there's like nothing here in this episode. It feels like a bunch of air.
It's filler.
There's no stakes. No, I don't like. It's just you're losing me. But it's because they've got to get 8 to 10 hours of content,
Speaking of feeling like an outsider, it's really I don't have an answer, but all I can say is that it does sort of, it does disappoint me that there's a huge swath of people, especially in my generation, who would rather, binge watch a 9 or 10 hours of a miniseries on Netflix or on HBO or whatever than sit down and watch an hour and a half movie.
My wife is that way.
And it's bizarre. It's kind of weird to me, but I it's like, what do we as storytellers, how do we approach that and kind of, and it's because it's, I think, like you said, you kind of hit the nail on the head, where the amount of times that I've watched a show and I've been like, this is a good show. I don't watch a lot of TV, but occasionally I'll sit down and watch one, and I've thought to myself, this is really good, and then you get to episode 6 of 10 or something, and it's like, oh, this is the episode where they're going to talk about the time that the convenience store down the road closed, and it's going to be a little offshoot episode, and it's like, it has nothing to do with the rest of the movie or the show, and it's just because they needed to get the show to 10 episodes. And I remember Stranger Things, which I'm not a huge fan of, but I've seen it, and I can't remember what season it was, but there was an episode of that where it was like, I got 10 minutes into it and I just knew it was filler, and so I was like, I'm skipping this, skipped it, and I didn't not know anything. Like, I wasn't left out of anything. I completely understood everything in the next few
much
episodes.
Filler. Well, they should have stopped that show after the first season, but that's a whole
that first
other...
season should have just been it clearly wanted to be a movie. So,
I know.
I think that's honestly, I think a lot of these people that do write and create these shows know that, and they would very much be rather making a film, except it's just not what these
There's
streamers
no money.
want.
It's not what and the money's not there for it. I agree.
So to go full circle, I suppose, it's this. I think that this movie couldn't be made for 2.5 mil with the cast it has, and
unlikely,
the incredible talent behind it is remarkable, but I think that these days you would just never get that funding for it. And B, like you said,
you wouldn't be able to theatrically release it.
We'd see Drugstore, like HBO's Drugstore Cowboy, 10-part miniseries, and it would be...
No, you wait. With all of the remakes that are happening, I would not even bat an eye if I saw a promo somewhere that was coming to Netflix, Drugstore Cowboy,
the whole episode would be about them trying to get the body out of the motel,
a whole episode,
the entire episode. Which, and I think just to really, I think, drive the point home, the fact that you could do that, I could see that in my head right now, that a whole episode and it would probably be acclaimed. It's like, oh my God, this whole episode is just about them trying to get this body out. It's so great and tense, and yet that it's what amounts to about 5 or 10 minutes of screen time in the movie is so tense, but so exciting and fun and really like. It's efficient. I think that's the thing, is that it drives its point home. It gets everything done, and it doesn't feel like it's rushing through anything. It's just
not at all
efficiently told. It's not overstaying its welcome, and I think that's really important to all storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. Well, a couple things that I want to talk about before we close on the subject of Drugstore Cowboy, to bring it back specifically to the film. I mean, we mentioned kind of in passing. But William S. Burroughs being in this film, I think is such a wonderful extra little treat.
Yeah.
And I actually think, of course, he's not an actor per se, but I think his performance in this film is really wonderful. Of course, he's from St. Louis, Missouri, so props there. And of course, he was like a beat poet and a writer. And a junkie himself, and was not shy about telling people that. Literally wrote novels about it. And I think his performance is really lends like almost this otherworldly kind of gravitas and quality to it, to me. I think is so helpful in bringing around and kind of closing this third act. It's such a beautiful. You'd mentioned real briefly right before we started recording, his Nostradamus-like almost, monologue about drugs and drug users being used in the future for the like international law enforcement agencies to create this giant,
apparatus,
multi-billion-dollar apparatus of and infrastructure. Just as an excuse to kind of just go into every aspect of a person's life. Of course, that has happened. It had already been happening when this movie was set. Of course, Nixon in the United States really like led the kind of modern charge on a quote unquote war on drugs that we have now.
Reagan, of course, doubled down on
Reagan.
that. Yeah.
And it's not really let up, I don't think, too much, except a little bit with the legalization of marijuana in some states, and some decriminalization in some pockets of our, of the country here. Oregon being one of them. Of course, this was shot in location mostly in Oregon and around Portland, which I think is actually quite beautiful. But yeah, I just think the beautiful, when we're kind of wrapping up the film. And you have William S. Burroughs after he's befriended Bob. And, of course, Diane comes. We talked about, visits Bob and drops off some drugs. Maybe that was like her last attempt to try to convince him to come back by tempting him with the drugs. He doesn't fall for it. He actually gives them to William S. Burroughs' character. And they kind of befriend each other. He plays this priest, Father Tom Murphy. So they kind of befriend each other. I just think it's so beautiful when David comes in and shoots Bob up, and he's being carried out of the hotel into the stretcher, into the hearse, and Father Tom Murphy closes the curtain. I think it's just such this beautiful moment. But I didn't forget that he was in the film, but I just paid special extra attention to his presence in it this time.
Such a hypnotic tone shift in a really good way. Like it's like every time, I almost felt like, and I don't think this is the case, but every time William Burroughs is speaking in the movie, it's almost like they just let him speak without a script, like that he's just giving you this wisdom. Almost.
Yeah.
And it feels like it feels kind of the opposite side of the coin of like a Colonel Kurtz, where it's like you just are transfixed on every word this guy says, and he's got such a hypnotic tone and pattern of speech where he sort of speaks slowly and low and almost like he's talking to a ghost, and it's really a fascinating tone shift.
Or he is a ghost.
Kind of fast-paced, exactly. And then even after, of course, David shoots Bob and he's wheeled out, and they've got Gentry, I believe, is the police officer's name.
Gentry, yeah.
Yeah, and he, it's kind of also touching that this this guy really does want Bob to get better and to kind of, it's like this for perhaps again superficial reasons of just like community safety and all that. But
they have a relationship.
But they do. There's like a weird kind of it's like he's almost like this father figure in a way that's like disappointed in his son, and of course it ends on this great montage and monologue of Bob basically deciding that like, well, that's my debt paid to the hat, and now I can fall back into the world of that I love.
So it's so interesting, right? Because the book ends with Bob dying, but here we have, and I think this is a really interesting treatment on the ending. We have Bob being hauled away in the stretcher, and it's a bookend. We book it. Gus Van Sant bookends in the film. We start with this over the head close-up shot of Bob. His face lying on the gurney. He's kind of telling his story throughout the film. He's kind of narrating it. We come back at the end, and he's been shot. He's like actually doing the right thing finally, and he actually even stops David from harassing this guy. David comes back and seeks his wrath, his vengeance, right? Yeah. And so Bob's actually kind of done a decent thing here. He's in a better place in his life, at least according to society, than he has been at any other time. And here's where he ends up. He's in the hearse, and we have this beautiful moment where he's like you said, I've paid the debt. Okay, whew. All right, that's what the hat needed from me. I've paid that off. I've finally done with that. And look how awesome this is. The ambulance has taken me to a place that's going to be filled with drugs. So we have this. So we have this sense that Bob is going to heal up, likely, and go back to robbing pharmacies and hospitals.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure, but they kind of hit towards that. It doesn't seem like he's in any critical life-ending, circumstance. I mean, he has been shot, but it's not like the paramedics are back there.
Yeah, they say that you can. The cop can talk to him for a few. Like it's not urgent.
Yeah. It's like, hey, you can chat for a few minutes. It's all good, So we really don't get the sense that there's this huge urgency or anything like that. So it's I love that the character, he doesn't, he's going to go right back to what he was doing before. And so I'm actually surprised in today's day and age, they probably would make like a Drugstore Cowboy 2. Now he's older. The TV series would be that he's older, and this is his like new crew, and
you'd have like the ghost of Nadine come and.
Yeah. I mean, oh my gosh. Anyway, well, I'm glad you liked the film, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm always thrilled to share films that were important to me when I was a kid, and I enjoyed it too for my first viewing in a long time. I had a blast with it, and I've had a blast talking about it with you today, and I hope everybody out there has enjoyed us listening to it. If you haven't seen the film, please do check it out. It's
I think
really
we both recommend it. Yeah,
highly recommended. All right. Well, I look forward to your pick next time, and I can't wait to do this again in a couple weeks. Cullen, take care. Have a good day. Everybody listening out there, take care. Be good. Be safe. We'll see you next time.
Don't do drugs. Bye-bye.